Well, so far in class, we've talked about the Declaration of Independence. We talked about the Constitution. Now we're going to talk about the Bill of Rights. Now, the Bill of Rights really is part of the Constitution, but it's a special part of the Constitution. It is the first 10 changes or 10 amendments to the Constitution. Now, let me back up just a little bit and emphasize again, the writing of the Constitution really was a monumental task. Getting enough of the former colonies to agree on what would become the founding document that was going to outline how the government of this new country would be organized was an incredible task of compromise, of give and take, of cooperation, and it was a commitment to producing the best possible document for its time. It was not perfect, though. Many of those who we call the framers of the Constitution, these were people who argued and contributed to the writing of the Constitution. They acknowledged that it did not satisfy every state, and it did not provide adequate protections for individuals in the new country. Even at the Constitutional Convention itself, where the Constitution was written, several delegates voiced their concern about this, and once the Constitution was sent out to be ratified, almost immediately James Madison began working on possible changes to the Constitution. Now again, anytime there's a change, we call it an amendment. The Bill of Rights are these first 10 amendments, and it's a very difficult process. In fact, there's only been a total of 27 amendments in the whole history of our country, and of those 27, the first 10 of them come from the Bill of Rights. So with that introduction, I want to talk about some specific Bill of Rights. We're not going to talk about all 10. We're going to talk about the First, Second, Fourth, Fifth, and Sixth Amendment. Now next year when you have your U.S. government class, you'll have a chance to talk about all the amendments, and not only just the first 10, but the 27 as well too. But for this class, we want to give you just a brief introduction to some of the more well-known, more popular of the amendments. Now the First Amendment is ones that you're probably familiar with. There's the freedom of religion. There's the freedom of speech. There's the freedom of the press. And then of course the last one, the freedom to peacefully assemble. Now, these First Amendment rights are not absolute, meaning you can't say whatever you want to, whenever you want to. You can't use threatening speech against somebody. And the freedom of the press is also limited. You can't use slander against somebody or intentionally smear their reputation to do them harm. And the idea of peacefully assemble, you cannot just get a group of people together. There's rules that you need to follow, but you do have a constitutional right to be able to get groups together. Sometimes it just involves putting together a simple permit from the area that you want to assemble. But that is the First Amendment right. The Second Amendment, this one is still even debated quite hotly today. It guarantees the right to bear arms, but even the idea of bearing arms is still debated today. What does constitute arms? Does it include any firearms, any weapons, any guns? There are limits to this as well too. There's some people who no longer have the Second Amendment right. If they're convicted as a felon, generally speaking, they cannot then for the rest of their lives, generally they cannot legally have a firearm. But also too, again, what constitutes a firearm? What if somebody wanted to have a bazooka, like a shoulder-held rocket launcher or an atomic weapon? Generally speaking, there are limits to the Second Amendment, but as it's been interpreted today is that we do have a right to bear arms. The Fourth Amendment. This is a right to privacy in your houses, your papers, and your fact. This essentially is for individuals' right. When do we have an expectation of privacy? No things. We can't have things like unreasonable searches and seizure of your property. In a sense, the middle picture that you see right there. Generally speaking, the police need to have a warrant if they want to come into your home. If you don't invite them in, they legally cannot come into your home and seize or take things that are in your home. Now, if you let them in, that changes everything. But like that Matt says, come back if you have a warrant. They need to go convince a judge that there's a reason why they need to go in and search your home. It's the same as a policeman if you're walking down the street. If they don't have something called probable cause, or if you're driving in your car, a policeman cannot search your car unless there's something called probable cause. You'll have a chance to discuss that in detail next year in your civics class. One of the more recent issues that's come up is with the NSA, the National Security Administration. It's been revealed that they have been collecting all sorts of information on its citizens. Ideas as far as your web searches, your web activity, your cell phone conversations, or at least who you have called, your text messages. All this has been collected by the NSA, and this has brought up the issue, do they have a right to do that, or does the Fourth Amendment protect us as citizens to have an expectation of privacy when we're on our cell phones or when we're surfing the computer, those types of things, surfing the internet on our computers? That's the Fourth Amendment. Now, the Fifth Amendment, you're probably familiar with this idea called I plead the Fifth, and I'm going to get to that in a second. But the first one I want to talk about is something called double jeopardy. And it states you cannot be tried for the same crime more than one time. Essentially, the government, if they feel they have a case against you and they take you to court, take you to trial, they have one opportunity to find you guilty. And if the jury or if the judge finds you innocent, that's it. They got one shot. They cannot continue to keep charging you over and over and over again until they try to get the guilty verdict. Double jeopardy. They got one shot at you, and that's all. You cannot be forced to testify against yourself at trial. And this is probably where you've heard that phrase, I plead the Fifth, meaning that if you do go to trial, you don't have to say a thing. You can have your attorney speak for you the whole time. You do not have to get up and testify on your behalf. And the last one of the Fifth Amendment is your property rights, private property, cannot be taken for public use without you being compensated. Now here I have a picture, I believe this one came from China, where somebody didn't want to sell their property, so they just built a road all the way around it. I don't know much more, but I thought it was a funny picture. But generally speaking, when a county or a state or the federal government, if they're building a freeway or a road or an airport, a large project like that, and if your private property is in the way, essentially they'll come in, something called eminent domain, which has been a touchy issue, but they'll come in and they'll seize that property from you, but they have to compensate you for it. You may not be happy with the compensation, but at least they have to give you something, a certain amount of money for that. Now, the last amendment we want to talk about is the Sixth Amendment. You do have rights. If you're accused of a crime and you're taken to court, you do have rights. Now, the first one is you have a right to a speedy and public trial. So that trial has to happen in a speedy. Now, that's a little bit of a sloshy term, but they can't just throw you in jail and let you sit there for 10 years without sending you, giving you a trial or a trial date. And that can be a public trial so everybody can see. You do have the right as a defendant to decide if you want your guilt or innocence to be determined by a jury or to be determined by a judge. And you can also question witnesses against you at trial. So if there are people that are coming at your trial and testifying against you, you have a right, or your attorney has a right, to question those witnesses. And the last one is you have a right to have assistance, a lawyer, to help you with your defense. Because quite honestly, if you go to trial, if you haven't been trained in law, you're not a professional. But yet the prosecutor, that is what they do day in and day out. They are a professional, and they'll be very good at their job. So you would want to hire or get the best attorney possible. The Sixth Amendment gives you that right, that somebody can speak on your behalf. So there you go. You got some of the biggies of the amendments of the Bill of Rights. You just got a little bit smarter.